All right, so we're going to go.
Great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch. This is Webinars with Wendy. We are continuing our series of webinars to bring you interesting topics and education on all things horses. Today, my guest is Mike Buskohl, and he is here to talk about upregulation in horses, which actually is something I am super interested in because I think that this is the key to really finding a way with horses. So welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
So Mike, tell me a little bit about you. Like, what's your background? You look a little long in the tooth. So I think you've been around a while.
I have been around for a while. This is actually, 25 years with horses, and that was actually a second career. So.
Oh, what was your first career?
Human chiropractor.
Oh, okay. So what led you to being a human chiropractor?
Well, to be very honest, I grew up under chiropractic care my whole life. And I thought, I just thought that's what people did. It's pretty cool. And so as I got, I've always had horses, and I thought, well, it seems like that chiropractor makes pretty good money. And then I could actually go off to horse shows and I won't have to answer to a boss and blah, blah, blah. That got me started. And then I fell into the rabbit hole and this whole thing of the central nervous system actually driving life itself has kind of consumed me. And during human practice, I hardly had time to ride horses, and I started doing a few horses. And I think you've had Dr. Bellini on, about the AVCA course, and so I took the AVCA course and gradually, not so gradually, maybe phased from human to equine practice, and I feel like it's the passion of my life.
So you started doing horses about 25 years ago, you said?
Yes.
And did you had your own horses at the time? So have you had horses your whole life?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. What kind of horses did you have when you were a kid?
I just had ponies and horses from the sale barn and that sort of thing. And I as I became an adult, and I started first showing Appaloosas, and then I kind of moved more into the working cow thing. But since 90 or 95% of the horses that I work on now are warm bloods, I became interested in them, and they actually have become a real favorite of mine. And I have had one warm blood. We showed him one of my clients showed him as a hunter, and I've have you ever had Kip Fladland on here?
I have not.
He's a Buck Brannaman guy, and I know actually Gretchen, my host here, told me that he's a colt starter, he's a Montana ranch guy, and so on. And he said, I think of my top 8 horses, favorite horses of all time, 7 of them are warm bloods, and I can appreciate that now.
Wow. So did your parents have horses? Did you grew up around horses?
Well, they started getting us ponies when we were kids, and so we always had the kids, and we had hand-me-down saddles, and we used rugs for saddle blankets.
Oh, wow. I'm just wondering how much chiropractic you needed from riding your ponies.
Yeah, not so bad. I think I had pretty good ponies most of the time.
Oh, okay.
You hit the ground a few times, a few concussions, that sort of thing, but pretty much the normal kid horse thing, I think.
Great. So you started doing chiropractic first on people, and then migrated to horses. And so roll forward now, 25 years later, you've been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
And
yes.
So I'm sure that's what we're going to talk about, is kind of what your insights are into your perspective of horses from a chiropractic or a nervous system or a combo.
Combo, because the whole the fascia thing has become we've become aware of the contributions that fascia make to the structural integrity of the body and tensegrity and all that sort of thing. And it's I don't work on horses in the cross ties. I work on them moving because I think that their legs. I tell my clients that the horse comes with 4 3.5-foot crowbars, their legs, and it's that leverage that actually induces the movements that can help or hinder your horse, depending on what kind of proprioceptive control they have over where they place those feet. So then the fascia element comes along, and it's like a big web. It's like if you're unwrapping meat from the grocery store or something, and you happen to get that plastic wrap tangled up, it's like you've got a mess on your hands. And that's kind of what can happen in the body. And then it will begin. There's actually a direct connection of the neck fascia directly into the spinal cord called myodural bridge. And so as that horse moves, I'll back up a step. To me, this whole story starts actually way back in embryology.
Okay.
So, in embryology, the sperm and the egg unite, and then there's a ball of cells called a blastula. And the first thing that develops in that blastula is something called the primitive streak, which then becomes the brain and the spinal cord. And the rest of the body literally grows out of that primitive streak spinal cord. So Thomas Edison said the purpose of the body is to carry the brain around. And so I view it as, there's only one organ in the body that is sensitive enough that it is totally encased in bone, which is the central nervous system. And so that the body is designed to protect that central nervous system no matter what happens. If up here in Illinois, of course, we're going to slip on the ice a lot. So if you slip on the ice and you fall onto your back, what do you reflexly do? You curl up your body instinctively. There's no thought involved. You curl up so your head doesn't hit the ground when you go backwards. So the body is really primed to protect that central nervous system. And there's some things that happened in my human career that sort of directed me into looking a little deeper inside the spinal column. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. I mean, I've always kind of joked when I tell people, like, we put all the important stuff as far away from the ground as possible, right? The eyes, the ears, like we put it up on the top of a stalk where it could, we could fall down. And I've always kind of, I understand it because then we have the perspective of height, but it also, makes it unstable if we're not well balanced, if we're not grounded, if we don't know where our feet are. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's the horses are even more sensitive to that than we are, and as you well know, a good deal of training is about making that horse feel as free on his feet as possible, as balanced as possible.
All right, so are you going to talk more about I took embryology in college, and I probably am one of the rare geeky people that it's like, oh, blastomeres, and development of the new, the tube and the whole bit, and
yes.
So you mentioned something about the fascia connecting into the spinal cord. Are you going to talk more about that? Because I find that really interesting.
Oh yeah, but we'll talk about a lot of things. Yeah,
okay.
And actually, I thought of something that I wanted to start this with. That just popped into my mind. I'd like to start with a bit of a metaphor.
Sure.
And this was taught to me by one of my mentors many years ago. And it's a story called The Dangerous Curve. And it's about a town on a mountain that lived on a big drop off in a mountain. And there was a big drop off with a big curve as you went into town. And so this town really, really, really invested in the latest medical technology with the ambulances and the life support systems and so on because of the accidents that may happen on that curve, and a very, very sophisticated arrangement of saving people's lives. And one guy came to town one time and said, I have a question. Why don't you put a guardrail on the curve? And that's kind of working from the central nervous system out, changes the posture of the horse enough that I consider that to be the guardrail that's going to prevent a whole bunch of leg problems and other problems in the horse.
Awesome. That's really cool. All right. So where are we going to start this story?
Well, I would say I have some notes. Let me look at them here. As we talked about the machine, the body, the machine. Remember the Police album a long time ago, The Ghost in the Machine?
Yeah.
That was like yesterday, right? But yeah, that's the central nervous system is the ghost in the machine, and so this machine basically exists to provide oxygen and nutrition and support for that central nervous system. It makes me think of in the old Star Treks. They used to go to a planet, and here's like some creepy little thing living on a globe, but it can control the entire planet. Remember those? And our brain and spinal cord sort of looks like that, kind of a gooey little thing, but it's really what runs the show. And so, in chiropractic, there is a lot of talk of subluxation, and there's a really a lot of good research on how that happens and how degeneration happens from subluxation. And I think with the addition of the fascia information that we can look more at, well, how are these misalignments or subluxations created? And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. I think really what a lot of the buckling, the compromise in the spine is actually something, it's not the body doing something wrong, it's actually the body doing something right. I think probably you've had Dr. Bellini on, I think, right?
Yep.
And we're good buddies. And she talks about dural torque. And I look at that, I see the dural torque it's evidence of the problem, but I think actually the dural torque is a result of the body doing something to take pressure off of the spinal cord. I had two pivotal things that really kind of pushed me in the direction that I go with this today. Is a long time ago, I used to play judo, and I was at the upper weight class, and there was just one other guy there that was like 260 pounds and had done wrestling and judo since he was 8 years old. And he just destroyed everyone. And I thought, well, no one would go with him. I was like, I have to go with him. And of course, he kind of like used me to mop the mat every day. But one day, there's a particular throw. It's called the cowboy throw. And I just happened to do that on him perfectly. And there was no more effort involved in that than throwing a towel over my head. And I'm like, oh, this is the magic of leverage. That 260 pounds became nothing. And I've had actually clients whose veterinarians told them, well, a human can't produce enough force to overcome the force of a 1,400-pound horse. And I agree with that. And I think if the whole, whether you're adjusting a segment or you're adjusting a body, if you use the horse's body weight, that's where real force is generated. And it's also can be a very controlled force so that you're not exceeding any limit that the body has. The second thing that really kind of made me look at things a little bit differently, while I was in human practice, I got certified in something called MUA, which is manipulation under anesthesia, and it's a procedure to take care of like fibrotic scarring around through the multifidi and the spinal muscles and that sort of thing. And so to get certified, I took my patient into the surgery center, and we put her under twilight sedation. And in this procedure, the patient is laying on their back, supine. And the first thing you do is raise the legs to begin to engage the low back fascia. And the anesthesiologist is watching the heart monitor while we're doing this. So we raised those legs like 5 degrees. Heart rate went down 10 points. Another 5 degrees, heart rate went down another 10 points. And we weren't even to 45 degrees and the heart rate is below 40. We're like, whoa, got to call this whole thing off. And it really struck home that, like, what puts more pressure on the central nervous system, even than say like the idea of two bones pushing on a nerve root. That actually only goes to one part, where if what Chinese finger traps are.
Yes.
You put them on your fingers and you go like, and if you go like that, the more you pull, the tighter it gets.
Yep.
And so the spinal cord is set up so that long time ago, Chinese men, Chung Ha Su at the University of Boulder, Colorado at Boulder, found out that the weight of a lead pencil on a nerve root for 2 hours cuts its function by 40%. So if you have internal pressure created inside of the spinal column, that will alter how the body works very fast. And so the body twists we'll get into a lot about twist here in a little bit, but the body twists to stabilize itself and makes itself more rigid, like this. So the more I twist that, the more rigid that is. So that's a lot of what the body is doing, is protecting the central nervous system, because inside the bones of the spine, that cord is so sensitive that, like, when the horse puts his head down to eat, like, the cord should not even touch the bones inside of the canal. So there's a very elaborate system of suspension in there called the dentate ligaments that actually, as the horse puts his head down, those ligaments lift the cord so that there's never any direct pressure against the cord. And so if those dentate ligaments, the horses, of course, so many of them are subjected to inflammation through, contact with human beings, that sort of thing. And just same for us, any vertebrate is subject to inflammation, and those dentate ligaments can become fibrotic, and then that cord can't be living and sliding inside of that spinal column. So then the body realizes that pressure there could stop my breathing, could stop my heart, that sort of thing. So the body will twist like this to create less motion. So quote, we have our stiff horse that we have to stretch loose, and it's really the body doing the right thing. And when that twists, there's a fellow named Dr. Pettibone that was very influential to me early in my career, and he was a mechanical engineer before he was a chiropractor, and he described that. And on humans, you can actually X-ray this because you can control where the central ray goes through, and you can control distortion of the X-ray. As this happens, a column can absorb X amount of load, and then this happens. That's called Euler buckling in engineering. And so the spine will Euler buckle in there to actually shorten the horse's body or the human's body, because that meninges, that dura mater that surrounds the spinal cord, attaches at the skull and at the sacrum. So to avoid the Chinese finger trap pressure in there, the body twists. And so, you look at people, almost everyone has one shoulder higher than the other, and maybe one hip protrudes a little more. That's the vertebrate twisting to direct and control movement that does happen in the joints of the spine. And the horse does the same thing, and they'll use the shoulder group and the muscle and the opposite hip usually, and that twists. And the horse has a handful of what I call, just points of no return. And one of those, of course, as you probably know, is like along the area of T13 in there, where the front spinous tips lean back and the back ones lean forward for leverage and control. But there in the middle there, that's a lot of times in there, and 2 or 3 segments either way is where the Euler buckling will occur. And I work with a lot of veterinarians, of course, and many times when the vet will ultrasound a back problem, and you see that dark spot. And what that dark, and a lot of times it's where the vet will inject. But in human studies, again, what that really is the tiny intrinsic muscles, the multifidi, rotatories, all those muscles. When that kink sets in there, that muscle is in a point of no leverage and can no longer make a change there. So what happens when a muscle is not yours, it will become fatty. So that dark spot is a fatty intrinsic muscle in the spine. And so you've lost the ability to bring that back up and release that twist. So then if you look at the horse, you'll see, usually if you look from behind, you'll see one scapula pushed off a little bit, and you'll see one SI, the tuberous sacrale, is up a little bit from the other one. And that's the muscle straining to create that twist and that stabilization. And so I think that, engineering really applies here. And the mass of anything dictates what, if a Volkswagen hits a semi, who wins? Mass always wins. And so if we look at the body of the horse, where's all the mass in the rib cage full of organs? And so when that buckling happens there in the rib cage, of course it goes down, the ribs end up in the sternum, so it has a big effect on the sternum and that whole stomatic gnathic system underneath it there. And so you have to approach this so that you can help that horse take that twist back out. And a lot of what we call subluxations occur down the spine, and they are driven by the weight of where the rib cage is. And I'm actually going to show some pictures here, and I hope they'll show up okay. You guys see that okay?
Yep. If you pull it back a little bit, we'll see the whole thing.
Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Okay. So like those, obviously those are horses' feet, and the little red star represents the center of gravity of the horse on the ground. Of course, it's up in his body, but where it hits the ground really determines whether that rib cage is going to work for us or against us. And I've exaggerated this a little bit, but you can see that the left front foot is a little bit forward. Yep. And so the center of mass represented by the star is slightly off-centered and forward. And that actually, I think it has a survival mechanism as well, because in nature, really, the horse has to be stiff to accelerate to save his life. And so this configuration will sort of lock him onto a lead so that he can accelerate and get away faster. However, if we're going to do working cow horse or pre-St. George dressage or meter 20 jumping, we really need to have that center of gravity here. Yep. I think anybody that, and you see the front feet are then become more evenly weighted, which is, I think, extremely important neurologically, and it's where the surefoot pads come in because.
Oh, you froze.
A horse's cerebellum is, in relation to the rest of its brain, is actually much larger than ours. It's really, really a dominant neurologic feature on the horse's cerebellum. And so if you're getting improper information from these feet up the legs through all the stomatic apparatus coming up into this area, and actually literally the TMJ joints, like a horse, like us, a horse has a motor cortex and a sensory cortex. And 40% of the sensory cortex is dedicated to the jaws in quadrupeds. And so a lot of veterinarians say, well, the problems start from the back forward. And I say the symptoms may start from the back forward, but the neurologically dominant part of the horse, the front feet, jaw up into here, is where the horse really stands upright. And so if this twist occurs, then I have a little device here I'm going to use to show this. Let's say we have, if you could take a proper X-ray all the way through a horse, you would see looking at the top of the horse, you would see the Euler buckling would look like that. Not as dramatic as that, but to make an effect, that's what happens. So that's going to throw the center of gravity off of the horse. And what does a horse hate more than about anything? Falling down. So he begins to create other kinks determined by where the intrinsic muscles of the spine attach to the spine. So this might be a place in the mane where the horse's mane splits and one half goes one way and goes the other, because that neck is changing its angle to keep the head and the vestibular apparatus straight ahead of the rib cage. You have this thing, in the rib cage, you've got along the rib cage, there's like 70 joints, all with mechanoreceptors sending information back to the cerebellum, and that has to match with what's coming from the pole, which is very, very dominant proprioceptively. So the horse will kink like this. A lot of times he'll kink back here where the spine joins the pelvis at the lumbosacral junction, or it'll even torque the SIs, and then you begin to get a change in the fascia around the pubes, and that becomes chronic. And so one thing feeds to the next. So it makes sense so far?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially since, I'm always looking at horses with surefoot and seeing a lot of asymmetry and stance and that sort of thing, but seeing that change to a more balanced stance with the use of pads.
Yes.
And that's, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think a horse that's relatively well balanced will stand square on his own. That sort of makes sense. And when we don't see a horse standing square on his own, especially a strongly asymmetrical stance, all this stuff comes into play, right?
And of course, the horse is driven to stand in the most efficient way that he can to burn the least amount of energy to stand there. So at the same time, instinctively, without thinking about it, he's protecting that spinal cord always. So, I'm sure you, along with everyone else, you ride the horse and you feel the rib cage way more against one leg than the other leg. And so we're constantly trying to change that. Well, the reason that rib cage is against one more leg is because of that Euler buckling in the back.
Right.
And the body is actually driven. And then, it's a little bit of an irritant to me. A lot of people, we have to build up that horse's back, and they use belly lifts, or they use the famous, let's gouge them through the sciatic nerve and up in their butt. And, both times the back comes up, but I urge people, especially when you do the cross the sciatic nerve in the butt, put your hands on the hamstrings, do it, put your hands on the back and do it. And you'll find out it's actually the hamstrings that are tilting the pelvis that artificially lifts the back. And then when that happens, we engage the external abs, the rectus and that sort of thing. And what we really have to look at and consider is that big slab of intrinsic muscles around the spine, because they are wired to fire 30 milliseconds before the horse even moves his ear, let alone his foot or his tail or his ribs or whatever. And so in engaging, rebuilding the horse, we have to think about rebuilding that core, taking away these mechanical deficits that happen when that spine compresses and twists. And we can make it so that that horse's back can come up again, and he can have the bascule. And then at the same time, there's an awful lot of talk about vagal and polyvagal, blah 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 stuff now, and it's like, that is just a part of the autonomic system. And the other part, of course, is we talk about the sympathetic part. Well, that's a chain that runs down through the ribs, starts in behind the shoulder, the stellate ganglion, and runs vertebra to vertebra with a little thread that runs between them all the way. And so if that twists, there's actually a minuscule amount of traction on that sympathetic chain ganglion. And more than 9 times out of 10, as we work on the horse and bring that back up, he'll have an immediate bowel evacuation, because you have taken the mechanical strain, which is inevitable, off of that sympathetic chain ganglion, and then the vagus can do its thing. And then I like that concept, that idea, because then the brain is going to decide when to be sympathetic, when to be parasympathetic. And we can induce parasympathetic, of course, but it's always temporary. And that actually, the picture that I sent you ahead of me and the horse,
yeah,
I picked that picture because, that horse, a moment before, all of his buddies had been pulled outside, and he was, a big, 17-man guy, and he's climbing the stalls trying to get out. But then as we disengage that sympathetic chain in his back, he went totally parasympathetic. And I think, well, that's a good thing. I think long range, what we have to think about, and this is more and more, I get to work with trainers who think this way. I think one of the most brilliant medical minds in this country is Robert Lustig. Have you ever seen him or read any of his books?
No.
He's like a real genuine genius. And it's like he says, dopamine is actually, it goes on to addiction centers. So, to really get the same result, you have to get more and more dopamine. And licking and chewing is great, but I know in your talk with Dr. Peters, Martin Black talked about his special forces horses, and I think end up with that. And Gretchen, my host, has special forces horses, because they've gone past that into Dr. Lustig says dopamine is pleasure, serotonin is joy and happiness. And so if we have horses that can consistently balance their nervous system, so they're producing proper amounts of serotonin, then you have that horse that can think and can trust you. And it's a dynamic thing that, sometimes sympathetic's got to come up, sometimes parasympathetic's got to come up. And if you take that mechanical pressure off there, the horse or us can do that more like it should.
Yeah, and I think, like with the SureFit pads, I often see horses go from the lick and chew into what I think of as, I talk about down elevators in a department store, right? You see them just start dropping down level by level into a really deep state of relaxation. I have to be careful. I've seen some of them get so relaxed they start buckling, and you obviously got to move them, and I move them a lot quicker than I used to. But getting to that's, as I understand it from Dr. Peters, that is hitting into that serotonin.
I think sustained serotonin would be a goal. As you get down into that serotonin, then you're gonna cause hormonal improvement in the whole body and that sort of thing. So, right.
So I'm trying to figure out what question I want to ask here, but basically, if I was to recap what you're saying that it is almost natural to have a type of twist, because what it's doing is it's protecting the spinal cord by having that twist, because of the way the spinal cord is suspended within the spine.
Is a good word. Yes.
And so if there's something that's going to threaten that spinal cord, you're going to create a twist, which we see as an imbalance or an asymmetrical horse, or a horse that won't do things the same left and right. So here's a silly question, not so silly. We are built asymmetrically. Horses are built asymmetrically. That's just part of being alive. I think if we were perfectly symmetrical, I've always said to my students, if you're perfectly symmetrical, which foot are you going to start on? You would wind up hopping because your weight was so balanced, right? And I think that I don't disagree that our goal is to create a more symmetrical being for balance, for stability, for security, because if you're always off on one foot and something happens, your threat comes to you from the side and you're already going that way, you don't have the ability to stabilize. But at the same time, what is realistic in terms of creating a more, for lack of a better word, a more perfect balance?
Well, that'll be of course different for different riders, and I've worked for, and I'll leave names out of it. I worked for 2 or 3 people where all their horses, as they develop, the mane begins to divide down the middle, and it falls equally both ways, and that I see those horses with the most freedom to pick where they're going to put that foot when they put it down. Some horses, if they're imbalanced, they have to throw that foot out there to catch themselves.
Right.
And I think we're talking about, we have 2 different organisms. We have a horse and we have a ridden horse, and that's 2 very different things.
Yeah.
In fact, in the one of the first steps that we take as we try to return that horse to a position where he feels more secure, can move his balance better. I forgot what I was talking about there. Oh yeah. So one of the first steps we take is, with that buckling in the back, that will drive the ribs down into the costochondral joints in the sternum, and so we'll start out a lot of times. I call it the ring foundation from the sternum up through to the withers. There's so much mechanical activity that is rooted in that ring. So we'll start out and we'll find perhaps one of the wither tips that doesn't move as well as the others, and that's like an old defense in there. And so we'll have that horse move, and as he steps with, let's say we're going to circle counterclockwise to the left, because the tip has less freedom moving to the right. And so put pressure on that tip and use the force of the horse's leg, and it goes up through there, and then that will drive that whole ring foundation back into a center point, and you'll see those scapula come in more balanced. And I think I think maybe there are some events, barrel racing and so on, where maybe you don't want your horse so flexible, and it depends on what the rider wants.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I have an online thing now with Surefoot Online, and one of my assignments to everybody was just to put their hands on the withers and very gently see which way it moves more, left or right, and then do that on the Surefoot pad. So it's kind of a super reduced sort of version of, I think, what you're talking about is that this rib cage has to be able to move between the 2 shoulders, and if it's stuck to one side, it's going to reflect through the whole system.
Yeah, and I think that the neurologic effect of the Surefoot pads is just sheer genius, because I always tell my clients that cerebellum that controls, which is, again, I would say twice as important to the horses, to us even, and it becomes like a blackboard that everybody's written all the instructions on, and there's like 3 layers of writing on there, and you can't even make sense of it anymore. And then when the horse goes on the Surefoot pads, it's just like somebody up there with an eraser starting fresh in that cerebellum, and that's pretty powerful.
Well, you're the first person that has described that in the way I keep thinking of it. It's kind of like, resetting the computer, or just, resetting back to the original programming. I've thought that for a long time, but I haven't heard anybody else speak of it that way.
Well, the Surefoot pads are like a series of very controlled micro challenges. And so, he's on those pads, and his weights start, they start getting go into parasympathetic and they start moving and they're able to check themselves back, totally under control this way, check, 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 check. And all of a sudden they feel like, that's when they feel, you know how they just, all of a sudden they're done and they step off because they intrinsically know that, okay, I've got my feet back now. And then, this kind of ties in with another thing too, with this whole balance thing in the sternum and the withers. There's Hillary Clayton and some others talk about this. There's something in the spinal cord called a central pattern generator, and there's a big one right where the neck joins the rib cage. And I tell people to think about a central pattern generator. It's the same thing if you cut the poor chicken's head off and he's running around all over with no head. It's a central pattern generator in his spine that is running that pattern with his legs. And the same thing would be with like a horse out west that got into loco weed, and he's out there running himself to death. And it's an abomination of the central pattern generator, which causes the horse he just can't stop going.
Now there's two, right? One for the rear and front, one for the front.
Yeah. Yes. And I myself place more emphasis on the front one because of mechanics. There's a veterinarian that I'm indebted to that let me look at a lot of x-rays, Keith Merritt in the Chicago area. Like in humans, the spinal cord, because its biggest jobs are in the chest, heart, lungs, blah, 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 all this proprioceptive stuff. The spinal cord is fattest at C7 into T1. And so there's a real chance for pressure type injury there. And I think an awful lot of so many horses, like, one of the sayings that makes my skin crawl, got a hip out. And the horse's hip is quite crooked, but I find that a problem in the body is usually not that dramatic. It's usually very subtle. And when we see the big crank in the hips, that's actually the body rolling those hips, which rolls the spine and takes pressure off of that C7 T1 junction. It's a big deal right there. There's a famous orthopedic surgeon, human in Canada, Kirkcaldy Willis, and after he finished his career, he was interested in horses, and he got together with a bunch of vets, and they did a bunch of dissections, and by far the most degenerated spot in the spine is C7 into T1.
Well, and now we're seeing these malformations that contribute.
Yeah. They're breeding. The horses are, hypermetric horses are in fashion now. So, there's a veterinarian in Georgia, Dr. Betsy Ulm, I think her name is, and I showed the demonstration with the buckling down the spine, that whole thing, and Dr. Ulm did a study again on cadavers, and she found calcium deposits on the vertebra, kind of radially down the spine, like so. And if we were to get all the proper x-rays, we would see that those degenerative spots that she found are from the angles of the breakdown of the spine, trying to shorten itself and minimize stress on the spinal column. So there again, arthritis is the enemy, but a lot of times, the arthritis, the actual calcium salts of the arthritis are laid down there because of a pressure-induced electricity, piezoelectricity, sets up a current under pressure. Bone under pressure creates a current, and then the calcium ions follow that current. And so actually that's the body, again, building a brace in there to, it doesn't matter if the horse is limping as long as it's breathing, that sort of thing.
Right. One of the things I've always, not always thought, but I've more recently thought that we think of the spine as we have to mobilize all the joints, but really the spine's there to protect the spinal cord and minimize movement, make it very specific and distributed to protect the spinal cord. And I think that we've been looking at it kind of upside down, thinking, the spine allows movement, but really the spine is there to minimize or redirect movement to protect that spinal cord.
Yeah, in humans, the best low back guy in the world probably is Stuart McGill up in Canada, and you may on YouTube you may find McGill's big 3 exercises, and his whole approach is you have to actually make the spine, if you're going to put a workload on it, make the spine it has to have the ability to move, but then it also has to have the ability and the strength to be semi-rigid, and then the movement comes from the hip joints and that sort of, and that's how you can produce power with a stiff rod. And at the same time you're maintaining the patency of that canal that the spinal cord lives in.
Yeah, I mean, it's always this thing between stability and mobility, right? That's yes. Kind of the deal.
Yes.
And I think with people, I see this with riders all the time, where they have mobility where they should have stability, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And reprogramming that to stabilize in the torso to allow the hips to move. And I think in the same way with horses, that's what we're talking about, is we have to make a stable axial skeleton to be able to hold the weight of the rider and allow the limbs to move.
Yes. And actually, speaking of axial skeleton, I think when I wrote you, I talked about the Cartesian coordinate system, and that I think is a very useful tool that doesn't get used a lot. Are you familiar with that? There are three axes of movement.
Right. Just go ahead and keep explaining, so for people who aren't familiar.
Okay. Yeah. It's I think from the 17 or 1800s, it's a system to be able to describe spatially how something is developed or how it's moved and so on. And in the horse, there's X, Y, Z axis. And in the horse, the Z axis is from the tail head to the nose, and the Y axis is up and down, and the X axis is sliced anywhere crossways through the horse. So if we have that rib cage that in protection will buckle, and that we get that buckling in the mid back, then by default, I have to maintain that. I have the front half of the horse has moved one way across the x-axis, let's say to the left on a bigger left foot, and then in that case, usually the mane will go to the right, and then the hip girdle goes to the right, and there's more strain on the inside of the right hind leg. And so I would tell people to at home try to stand up and do a nice, easy knee bend, just maybe 4 inches or something like that. Then come back up, push your left hip back, your right shoulder forward, and then do the knee bend again. And your legs feel all bound up. And that's how horses travel around, because the mass, what happens to horses' legs, because they're trapped between the weight of the earth and the weight of the horse. And so if that weight is angling those legs, then you don't see a suspensory injured all the way across hardly ever. It's usually one branch, because the horse is having to use that branch more, because this defensive posture has put a twist into the horse, and there's more weight on one front leg and more weight on one back leg.
We see this. We see this all the time, and then of course we're not going to talk about saddles, and we're not going to talk about rider asymmetry, because that we will be here forever, because those are major. I can't tell you how many times I hear a rider tell me, "Oh, I'm really predominantly right-handed. I'm really strongly one-sided," and so just that statement is going to, if they ride a horse regularly, create an asymmetry that the horse has to cope with in order to protect itself, meaning internally.
I think it sounds like that person might make a good reiner. Where I see those reiners going around, and they've really got a bias there, and one arm on the side, and I think you have to either change your posture or become a reiner, maybe.
Yeah, well, even the reiners. I've worked with reiners. I worked with an amazing guy. He was quintidextrous. He could sing and play drums. Probably one of the best riders I've ever met. And his horses he could do 4 fast spins left and right without a stop and not have his saddle shift.
Yep.
And that's just, yeah.
Yeah, there's of course horsemanship applied there as well. I just, that posture popped into my mind when you talked about the asymmetrical rider.
No, but it's true. That's the epitome, because they're one-handed and they wind up in an incredible twist by the very nature of the position. And I've always recommended that my reiners ride two-handed a lot, right, just to keep the squareness. Yes. But anyway, so we know we have a bias in the horse. So now this bias, obviously, if we look at development, like if we look at a foal, like, do you work on foals?
I have, yes. In fact, one of my really fun success stories was I used to work on a lot more young horses. I got kind of caught up with the jumpers, and I haven't in a while, but I really like working with young horses. There's one of my clients was going to have the Dutch warm blood inspection at her place, and she had a baby, and he was one of those babies over at the knees, and his tongue is hanging out, and we're like, okay, well, so anyhow, we worked on that baby for the summer, and he ended up being he was judged the best mover at the Dutch inspection in the fall, and that, that's like Surefoot stuff. It's like it's all this stuff here. This is what tightens the legs and draws them. And it's what, the tongue, of course, anchors here. So this horse was probably through birth process, was really stuck right here. And so as we opened him up, his little withers popped up and he could move normally and actually did pretty well. And another thing with the young horses, too, is like, of course, it's pretty evident in the horse world with the up, down, one flat foot, one higher heel. And I think to me, I think a lot of that starts even to which side the mare feels most comfortable or the baby feels most comfortable nursing, because I think that's why, I would say, would you say about 80% of horses, their manes go to the right and they have a left bigger front foot?
Yeah. Yeah. If I had to put numbers on it, you're probably right.
And I think, more of them nurse on that side. And so they're leaning on that left front foot. And then, of course, survival is still at play. And so that horse instinctively wants to be able to take off in a hurry. If he's got all that weight on that left front foot, the fascia comes to play, and it rolls the weight of the body to the right so that they can quickly pick that foot up and take off. And so that causes the mane to fall to the...
Oh, yeah. So you started talking about fascia earlier, and then we've kind of gotten a little off of that. So I guess going back to like foals, when I see foals growing, I'm like, you need to be doing something now while they're growing to keep them in balance so that you're not dealing with those problems later on, because that fascia everything's growing, bone, fascia, muscles, and not evenly.
I think to me a real critical juncture in a horse's life is as a yearling. And if I had to have my choice between weanling or yearling, I would pick yearling, because then the bones are coming closer to closing and that sort of thing. And they're just like, there's so much potential and possibility with the baby, with the weanlings, that they got a little bit of, breathing room before the die is cast. But those yearlings are getting ready to be a big horse. And I started talking about the up-down feet. A lot of what the yearlings work on them. And a couple clients, we set up a deal where I worked on the horse every other week in the brachial plexus stuff. I think there's research saying that in that high-heeled side, many times you'll find more firing in the brachial plexus on the side of the high heel. So we worked to free that, and then the farrier would come on the weeks between and just shave a little bit on that foot. And we produced some horses. Gosh, now they're getting to be aged horses that have perfectly balanced feet. So they're much more plastic when they're young. So that's something that you just would hate to miss out on.
Yeah, and I think it's an area where there's always that balance between intervening and letting grow, and coming in kind of in a measured way, because I can remember when I was handling the thoroughbreds at the sales, and they all started winding up being pigeon-toed because they were a little splay-footed because they're narrow in the chest, and they started trimming them, and pretty soon we got them going the other way. Yep. So it's kind of like a little goes a long way, I think, at that stage.
You're bringing back memories of working on some yearling thoroughbreds out in Maryland, yearling stud colts, and they would jump entirely over top of me in the stall, and I didn't even know it till they landed.
So right now you're working largely on jumpers, right? I think that's what you said.
Yeah, probably 80% plus on jumpers.
Do you see a big difference between breeds?
I don't think a lot. I think the basics of what keeps them alive is all pretty similar. Of course, I work on used to do a lot of saddlebred work, and I've done a lot of Morgan and work, and I just got back in again to working on some Arabs, and that whole architecture of that neck is a little bit different, and you maybe got to really kind of think about that chest sling and that ring foundation in the front of the chest even more with them. But they're of course, they're not really made for jumping, so that's maybe kind of a different thing. So
yeah, endurance, they're amazing, right? You wouldn't take one of your jumpers and try to do endurance.
Yeah, they're both like really, really cool horses, and they just have different jobs,
Yeah. And in the dressage world now, we're seeing a lot of hypermobility. What are your thoughts about that, and how do we manage that?
Well, it's kind of like Western pleasure, I guess. Western pleasure was not so weird many years ago, but it just kind of, they sort of stylized it more and more and more until, there's a lot of lameness in those horses now.
Yeah.
Because it's there's not forward motion, and dressage is, I like anything, I guess you have to continue to stylize, and many of the big dressage horses now remind me more of moving like the I think back in the old days, Chuck Grant used a lot of saddlebreds for dressage, and some of the new horses are starting to move more like saddlebreds to me than the traditional warm bloods.
Right.
And that whole hypermetric thing in front, it's like if you have a tight fit and there's some irritation on those motor nerves, that's of course going to increase that motion. And so
But do you find that because of the hypermobility, they're less able to stabilize? I mean,
absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so is there, I mean, that's a genetic thing that we're bringing in, right? And so in terms of trying to create a more balanced horse that is hypermobile, is that fascia? What do we do?
You mean what creates the hypermobility, or?
Yeah, that, and then how do we cope with it?
Well, I guess like everything else, we have to reassess what our goals are in riding, because you can take a horse. That's where I think stretching actually is a double-edged sword. I think there's a lot of stretching is done, and it will immediately improve the movement of the horse, like for that day or that show or whatever. But if the body, we spent several minutes now talking about how the body sets up a pattern to defend the spinal cord and the brain, and so if you have legs that won't move as far as you want, and you stretch them, well, that can be done from the ground or from riding as well. So I think you're asking for more and more motion and driving those front legs out there, and you see it seems like the front legs are moving a lot more than the diagonal hind now these days.
Right.
And so that the trot to me is the ultimate therapeutic gait, because you can either the weight of that rib cage against one leg is going to tear your horse apart, or if it swings evenly, it becomes a tool that releases a lot of adhesions down the inside of the horse. And so I think that when you have these horses that are really, really rubbery and moving, they are just always going to take a lot more care than a horse with a little more, where his movement stays closer to his center of gravity. Should we say that?
Yeah, because I deal with some riders that are hypermobile, and I find that the struggle is that they can't find stability, so they have to use more muscle, but muscle is fatiguing.
Yes.
And then you wind up with, the fatigue factor in order to find stability, or the brace factor where they just lock into their bones. Yes. And I assume that in the hypermobile horses now, we're probably going to start to see the same thing.
Oh, well, we already have. Yeah. They have to be looked after constantly. And there's all the thing now about the roll current nose into the chest and all that sort of thing. And I think Totilas kind of changed everything with those big legs reaching out front there. And that became the thing that you had to do. And so there are some breeders that said, well, we just happen to have some horses that naturally do that because there's spurs in their neck. It's kind of human desire.
Yeah, you just have to look at dogs to see how we can influence.
Oh my gosh, isn't that something?
Sorry. I mean, honestly, right?
I don't understand that.
Yeah, we could go down that rabbit hole. Let's not. But oh wait, I had a thought and now I've lost it because of that.
Well, you know while you're thinking, it's like in my position, I'm gonna run into what I run into. They're going to be what they're going to be, and it's my job to try to keep them as safe as possible. And then I find the more that I adhere to this principle of like, how do I set up the body so that there's not stretch on the cord, they get away with a lot more. And we were talking about the central pattern generator and using the withers to initiate movement into that rib cage. And something I use to help judge that is that coming through and working is the nystagmus in the eyes.
Yeah.
I work on the horses moving. That's why I love Bettina's talk so much. She talked about how they actually use movement for chiropractic. And I mean, she was just a phenomenon, wasn't she?
Yeah. Yeah.
She was just really something. Anyhow.
Unique. Like, there'll never be another Bettina.
I mean, yeah, not many people have worked at it harder than what she did.
Yeah.
Anyhow, now I got off track on that. Now what was I talking about again?
That central pattern generator.
Then the nystagmus. So like as you lead that horse around the stall, when they're not getting a lot of feedback from their front feet, which I think is really important to them, that eye will be really darting ahead. Like I tell people about nystagmus, have you ever ridden in the back seat with someone riding in the car and they're looking out the window and you see their eyes going like this to the next tree or the next fence post? It's a reflex. You can't help it. So when you first start with the horses, they have diminished proprioception in their front feet due to all the pressure up here. That nystagmus will be going like crazy. And then as they start to, you can feel it in how they place that foot more flat on the ground as well.
Yeah.
But that nystagmus will start to slow down. And that tells me that real primitive part of the nervous system, the central pattern generator, the cerebellum and so on, is getting the upper hand, and it feels more in control. And then they have the option, like we talked about earlier, instead of throwing that foot out there to catch themselves, they can hold that center of gravity back here, and they can put that foot here or there or whatever's going to happen with the curve that's coming or the jump that's coming or whatever.
You know, I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner, right?
I did not know that. I think that's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I trained for 16 years. I worked with Mia Siegel, who was Feldenkrais's assistant before he started training other people. So Surefoot is based in Feldenkrais, but Feldenkrais was a judo master.
Yes.
I have his books, and Higher Judo is one of them. And, talking to you, I'm just realizing like that whole idea, he talked about reversibility, that you should be able to stop, go forward, go back, go in any direction. And to do that, you have to know where your feet are and where your center of mass is, right? Yeah. You have to have that understanding. And I'm always looking for horses, like you say, to place their foot, not just throw their foot out there. I don't know if you've ever used Surefoot with a rider on board the horse.
No.
I do this. I've done this from the beginning.
Cool.
We should have a talk about it. But one of the things that riders report consistently is that they report, I feel my horse's feet. Like some of them say, I feel my horse's back feet. And my thought is, what have you been not feeling all this time, right? But they also feel the horse. Literally, it's like the horse is, if I could kind of humanize it, like looking at their foot and placing it on the ground and looking at their other foot and like so consciously placing their feet. And the riders feel all this, which you wouldn't see or feel the same way from the horse, having the horse without a rider. And obviously I start without the rider, but then you were saying how you work in movement. And that's where I think Surefoot has not been acknowledged for its power in movement. But because by having, I make sure the horse is okay with the pads before I start doing this with the rider on, right? And I always drop back to the harder pads or a half physio pad because I don't want to offer too much instability when I first have the weight of a rider on their back. Yeah. But I will just start with the same process and have the rider walk that horse in the beginning, a lot of walk, and then ultimately trot and canter. And I just did a demo at the Western States Horse Expo with a woman, and it was like the horse was a little bit funky in the canter, and I just did the right hind foot. It had been on the pads already, but I did the right hind foot, and the canter totally changed, and everybody saw it. And I think that this is where, you're talking about, and what Feldenkrais is about, is in movement, that we need to make these changes, these experiences in movement, because that's what the horse is designed to do.
Yes, and the beauty of Feldenkrais is actually practicing, practicing a proper movement, and you build it into the nervous system. Right.
And once you know it. I mean, that's, people go, well, how long is it going to, you already know the movement, it's there. Or in the horse's case, we've just wiped the chalkboard clear and reset it.
Yes. So what they were capable of all along then. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have another question for you. Are you familiar with osteocalcin?
No.
It's a hormone. So I'm going to give you a little homework assignment, okay?
Yeah.
Look up osteocalcin. It's a hormone released by the bones, and the studies. If I remember, I can send you the link to the study that osteocalcin is triggering sympathetic fight and flight before the adrenal glands even, because in adrenally ectomized mice and people, you can still elicit panic attacks because of osteocalcin.
Interesting, huh?
And so, like when I'm working with a horse with surefoot, I pick up their foot, and I'm not just picking up their foot. I'm feeling for, where do I have movement in this limb when I pick it up? Or do I even have movement in this limb when I pick it up? Because the way I read this is, if that limb is rigid, then I've already got a sympathetic firing going on from osteocalcin. Now that's my guess, right? Kind of where my brain goes. But if you think about it, that rigidity is what we need in order to run, right? If we're really, you pick up the dog that's really loose, it's not going to run. The little terriers are always rigid, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm always thinking about that when I pick up a limb, to feel what's the quality of this limb, what joints are moving, what joints aren't moving. Does it just bend at the fetlock? Does it not bend the elbow? And then as I work with the surefoot pads, I feel those joints change, right? They get softer and easier. The horse starts offering me the limb and that sort of thing. So I've been using that as a read, especially when I'm introducing a new horse. Where are you in the sympathetic parasympathetic? If your limb is rigid, I'm guessing, even if you don't show it to me, there's a sympathetic elevation here that is not necessarily visible. And one of the ways I know that is that when I did a demo way back when at Equitana in Essen, Germany, they strapped a heart monitor on this horse I was working with. I could stand at its front foot and its heart rate was 40. I could walk to its right hind foot and it went to 160.
Yes.
Right? So, and that was the limb that was difficult and hard to pick up and all those things.
Like he just decided to be unpleasant about that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's already elevated and the heart rate showed it. But, you can't run around with a heart monitor on a horse all the time, right?
That's very interesting. So many times, and this is where the fascia, to bring fascia back into the conversation, I think this is a big thing with part of this deal. So many times I'll work on a horse or a pony, said, well, his knees don't bend very well. He's got arthritis in there. Yeah. And as you work on that horse's body and these fascia planes are all wound up in the fascial lines and twisting around the body and so on. And so that all goes, and that's why, it's a big part of lameness too, because all the tendons and the muscles of the leg, and of course that's interlaced with fascia, goes up and it's attached to the body, which weighs 1,000,000 times more than what the leg weighs. So again, the weight of the body wins. And so you redo that horse's body, and the surefoot pads, will do the same thing to the horse's body because it cleans the cerebellum, and the cerebellum says, oh, I would have a lot less pressure on my front legs if I was able to turn my pelvis on that Z axis. And so it turns the pelvis, changes all that groin stuff, and all of a sudden the horse has got a big knobby knee like this, or a pony. You pick that up and it bends 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And so it's the fascia of the body changed. The legs are really, to me, dependent upon all these fascial connections.
Sure, sure. So I have two more things to say. One is Dr. Kevin Hassler is finishing up a study on Surefoot on on 10, I think it was 10 horses and 10 control. And I can't wait to find out what he discovered.
Good.
So that's coming out.
We can really print some stuff then. Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I studied with Linda Tellington-Jones starting back in 1985. And she studied with Feldenkrais, right? So Linda Tellington-Jones, the T-touch and all that comes from her knowledge in Feldenkrais. I met her in 85. That's where I got introduced to Feldenkrais. But, I think back on her touches and her little circles. And I'm wondering how much that's actually talking to the fascia more than anything else.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's what I've been thinking for a long time is that she's really addressing the fascia.
Especially with the circles and
exactly with the circles, exactly, and
you may have heard people talk about chirality, like atoms and everything either spin levo left or right, dextro right, and somehow instinctively she picked up on all of that. And actually speaking of that and the sympathetic thing, went through Linda Tellington-Jones and the pads. You probably know Marie Hoffman.
Yes.
Marie and I, we formed, she's in Indiana now, but we formed a little team and we're, if you can, I don't have time to do it consistently on all these horses, but we have a handful of people that we've taught some basic steps of releasing the fascia in the rib cage. And there's a really, Marie's had just a real chronic bucker that stopped bucking. And some people had runaways and stopped being runaways. And if you can, we're working on a little system called Balance First, where we can teach people to release the fascia of the rib cage, or as my friend I'm sitting here with tonight, we call it having a rib fest. That actually takes pressure off of that sympathetic chain ganglion, and you've got a new horse then.
I can remember Mia putting so much attention on the rib cage in my Feldenkrais trainings with her, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about ribs on horses. And Joyce Harmon, I'm sure you know Dr. Joyce Harmon. She's now retired, but my horses lived at her place for 25 years. Okay. So,
oh, really?
Yeah.
What an opportunity.
So we're good friends. She's now off traveling and she's retired and a lot of stuff. But that idea that the rib cage is so it's the unsung hero, right? It's the part of the body that that we just didn't put much. Like I ask people what they're sitting on when they're sitting on a horse, and they go the spine. I'm like, hello, there's this other structure that you're sitting on, right?
And there's so many joints, and all of those joints send information back to the cerebellum about this big blob of mass in space. Yeah. So I'm thrilled to hear you talk about it, because I've just felt that the rib cage is again. People think about the front end and the back end and the legs, but they don't really consider what's in the middle, whether it's themselves or their horse. Yes.
I mean, I'll ask people where their first rib is, and you would be shocked. Well, maybe you wouldn't be shocked at to where they point.
Well, that's that I mentioned Pettibone earlier in the discussion, Dr. Pettibone, and as an engineer, he described the rib cage in the human, the rib cage as the foundation of our spine, not the pelvis. Because pelvis. A foundation has to be adaptable. Like we tell people, if I had an umbrella for my picnic table outside, and I made a hole in the cement to stick that into to keep it there, when the wind is blowing, eventually that leverage of that pole is going to crack that cement, and you've got an umbrella flopping all over. But they have those spring things that you can set that umbrella in. And it has foundation, but it gives with the wind and so on. That's why our rib cage and the horse's rib cage acts really as the foundation of movement in the horse. And I often tell people, even if I told someone who never saw a horse skeleton before, said, look at that and tell me, where do you think the kinetic energy would be stored? Or 99 out of 100, well, look at that big spring thing. The rib cage, that's where the kinetic energy is.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think we've gone a little over, but that's totally fine. I have so enjoyed talking with you tonight, Mike. This has been just a pleasure. And maybe you'll come back again and we can have another conversation, maybe a little bit more about ribs.
Yeah, and we have we've got we teach people a really good exercise for rebuilding and redeveloping the horse's core. And I apologize, I can't show it on here because it can be done wrong so easily.
Yeah.
And we try
Hey, I totally get it. I totally get it.
We try to get the vet to approve it for each individual horse. But yeah, there's really a way to, instead of belly tucks and butt pokes and all that stuff, there's a way to really develop those real, true, deep core muscles around the spine. And maybe we can figure out a way to talk about that sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been a real pleasure.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Take care and have a great night. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.